Hello and welcome. You are listening to the Philosophy of in Eastern Europe podcast brought to you by the European Center for Philosophy of Culture. We would like to re-examine Eastern Europe from a philosophical perspective.
One can say that, given the current geopolitical and geocultural circumstances, this question was never more important than it is now. So, what is Eastern Europe? Where is it located? What are its distinctive axiological and normative characteristics? What is its significance for the European cultural project?
Eastern Europe can be understood as a specific cultural formation, as a community of history and experience, a community characterized by its specific cultural sensitivities and sensus communis. However, it has always been a diversified community, a community in difference. It is a cultural space which carries testimonies of both the pluralistic, multicultural heritage of our region and of all the tragedies which took place here. We Eastern Europeans live in spaces which have been crossed in many ways and in many different directions by visible and invisible borders. Spaces organized by many different and often radically opposite points of reference, different stories and histories, by means of which we try to make sense of who we are. And it seems that Eastern Europe cannot be enclosed in a single, all-encompassing narrative. If so, then how are we to talk about it? Our guest today is Professor Gintautas Mažeikis from Vytautas Magnus University in Kaunas, Lithuania, a great philosopher of culture, a great expert in critical and post-critical theory and in semiology of culture. Hello, Gintas.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Gintas, to start with a triviality. Narratives build our sense of ourselves and of reality, provide us with the basic coordinates for our existential and normative orientation in the world. Now, the very category of Eastern Europe is like a nebulous condensation of different, often competing, or even radically opposite stories and histories. Such a state can create a specific theoretical, political, social drive towards some unifying principle which would help us to reconcile all these stories and histories. However, precisely here appears a kind of a risk, I would even say a serious risk. We can very quickly fall into what I would call narrative trap. This trap can take on many different forms. The most current and operative in our region there are many, but in my view, the most current and operative in our region are first, all these discourses of purity, innocence, greatness of particular states and nations. The second of those possible narrative traps can be seen in this colonialist and post-colonialist discourses of depreciation and self-depreciation, where, for example, Eastern Europeans for a very long time experienced this label Eastern Europe as a kind of a curse, as a kind of a stigma. And the third of those narrative traps is kind of typical for conservative circles in our region. And I would very quickly identify it as a kind of a reversed colonialist discourse, which can be articulated very easily. Well, now, finally, we Eastern Europeans are true Europeans, maybe the only true Europeans. How should we speak and think of Eastern Europe?
Thank you for
And what kind of narratives or narrative strategies seems to be appropriate?
Yes, thank you for a very long question. And what I would say, first of all, I separate narrative and traps because not only narrative create traps, but as well different icons or, for example, architecture or the buildings or monuments, they are even more nebulous and, even more presuppose unconscious reaction on some events or produce different memory than even public and official narratives. So we see the problem is more complicated than just about narrative traps. The second, regarding traps, what is important here to remember that after David Hume and Immanuel Kant, philosophers separated empirical truth and social justice. It's not the same. And when we are talking about historical truth and truthfulness, it's not always clear what do we mean. For example, do we mean that we will find some kind of full historical truth? According to David Hume and followers of him, it's completely impossible. Why? Because there is no empirical truth at all. No in physics, no in biology, and especially in history. This is impossible to find truth, and those who try to do it, they lie, and they are demagogues or ideologists. We can speak only about social justice, which is based on social consent or social agreement. Social consent and social agreement are oriented not about historical truth, but about our moral attitude regarding what's happened before us and about our consent, how to interpret what's happened without attempts to establish final historical truth. However, many of our politicians try to do it. They dream about historical truthfulness, and they declare that they will do this truth, they will establish, they will fight, and they will win for this historical truth. And this is completely, from scientific point of view, it's completely stupid behavior, because it's not, we are talking not about truth. There is no truth in this field. There is only can be justice. And when we will start about justice, we need completely different operations than searching of additional data. It's not about searching additional data, but about regarding what the traumas we have in this period and how we can find consent regarding these traumas. This is what I would say first of all. It's interesting that drama writer Henrik Ibsen, in his drama Wild Duck, he described this difference, between the searching of truth, which often put us on the road of death and tragedy, starting from Oedipus, and all our memory is related with this, tragedy of searching of truth, where truth is impossible at all. And he showed that what is more, Henrik Ibsen showed that much more important is to speak about social justice, which depends from our sensibility or moral sensibility, and how we can develop our moral sensibility. And sensibility as well consists from silence, and declarations. You don't need to speak about everything, You don't need every time mention that, for example, there are some people who try to always to say, okay, that Lithuanians are killers of Jews. Why? Because this Holocaust and some Lithuanians participated in Second World War. If you always mention this, fact, for sure fact, but which touch the only some group of Lithuanians, not all of them, you break any possible later communication regarding this problem. This is because you are searching for the final solution, but not about moral justice, and social and common agreement, common consent. So we see here many problems. And the last, which I would like to mention regarding the traps, these narrative traps or iconospheres traps, I would say that Slavoj Žižek mentioned, he used the very interesting concept of prohibition of prohibition. Prohibition of prohibition means that first prohibition officially can be formulated in the language of law. For example, it's prohibited, it's prohibited to support national hatred, for example, or ethnic hatred, And this is a prohibition. And the second prohibition, it's invisible. For example, in Lithuania now it's prohibited to promote ethnic hatred. But from the other side, everybody knows, then when we are speaking about Russian aggression against Ukraine, you can use some words, which if they will be used in the case of Jewish people, that will be your criminal situation. But in the case of Russian, in this situation of war, you can do it, and this is prohibition prohibition for the using of this law in this one very special situation. So first prohibition is legal. The second prohibition is based on our common sense and morality, which can contradict sometimes first prohibition. So when we are talking about, for example, reconciliation, historical reconciliation, ordinarily we must to remember about both prohibitions. Because first prohibition, it means that, for example, there are some anti-Semites in Lithuania still, as everywhere. This is, some everyday anti-Semitism between some of people, And they know that it's prohibited officially humiliate Jews, and to support some ethnic cleansing or hatred. From the one side, they remember this one. From the other side, between themselves, in this small group, then if they will speak, okay, I love the Jews, I'm support of Jews, for them it's prohibited. So they use both, tactics. Official and public prohibited to, blame Jews, and unofficially in their groups, they can do it, but never mix situation. They remember about this one. And this is double prohibition. And when we try to solve the problem, for example, Lithuanian-Poles relationships or Poles-Belarusian relationships, this is always, we need to speak about both prohibitions. One is official, and the another we need to research through our sociological instruments, anthropological instruments to understand. And on the second level of prohibition, ordinarily we are doing as well social agreement, social consent. So we have two social consents, public social consent and invisible social consent. So justice consists when we try to connect both levels, visible and invisible, but it's not about historical truth.
Thank you, Gintas, for this quite in-depth answer. But I I'm inclined to ask you to pose this question somehow again. How are we to speak now about Eastern Europe? In more general terms, of course, you provided a kind of a broad picture.
Yes. That's
for sure.
You mentioned that Eastern Europe consists from multi layers of problems, traumas. We have more history than we can consume this history. This is over historical lands and bloody lands, by the way, full of hatred, as well full of hope of historical truth, but not justice. So we, first of all, what is important here to understand that Eastern European consciousness is full of traumas, different, very different traumas. Some of these traumas are more relevant for contemporary time. The other traumas less. That's this is first. The second, it's what is important that's ordinary. We try to build our national proud, to show our national dignity. But from the other side, we don't like to be Eastern Europeans, and it's very strange. For example, Lithuanians can show their dignity, or Poles do the same, but from the other side, they try to escape to be called as Eastern Europeans, because this question of Eastern, all the time, for a long time, Western was considered as free. This is a stereotype of concept. And stereotypical concept presuppose if you would like to be respected, you should be from the West. If you consider yourself as less important, or colonized, or brainwashed, or full of traumas, you call yourself Eastern European, In a way, you put yourself into worse situation. This is the first. The second is what is important. It's, I would say, recognition and mutual recognition between Eastern Europeans. Recognition. It's first of all, it's to recognize your own history and your own problems. Internal problems, historical problems, all of us we have. And the second is mutual recognition between Eastern European countries. Why we try to escape from this title Eastern European? Because Eastern European countries don't have praxis to recognition each other, mutual recognition, mutual proud, mutual dignity. That's it means, for example, Lithuanian, Latvian, Estonians, Poles, Lithuanians. We always try to humiliate, at least on the invisible level, to show that one nation is better than the other, And from this side, we don't feel this equality and freedom. We cannot construct this freedom and equality in Eastern European without becoming Western Europeans. That's in order to communicate between Lithuanians and Poles, we need, to construct ourselves like British or French, people. This is playing different, to start to play different roles. And it means that we didn't do some very important job which was done in Western countries. For example, when French and Great Britain recognized each other's, cultural achievements, its other, national proud. And it was very difficult to build this mutual recognition in between Germany and French, because of two wars, But in a way, you remember that the European Union started from this, recognition of mutual problems and mutual achievements in Alsace and Lotharingia region. This was very special, and the European Union is built on the praxis of mutual recognition, and then this mutual recognition was spread. I remember this former Republic of Yugoslavia, Macedonia. This is a long story problem, how it was difficult and still difficult for Greece and Serbs and Kosovo and some other probably nations to recognize Macedonians. And from the others, how it's difficult for Macedonians to recognize that they are not only Macedonians, but there are Macedonians in Greece as well. And what to do it, who are right and who are not, And searching for historical truth, it's a deadly road for them, That's they need to do some moral reconciliation and social political agreement about these problems. The same situation I see on the borderlines Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which include and created endless of problems, Polish-Ukrainian relationships, Belarusian self-recognition as Belarusians, they don't know who they are, some of them. That's Polish-Lithuanian relationships, endless, self-victimizations regarding Vilnius. Now Belarusians are included as well to Vilnius problem, and even Jews are included. This is funny, but in any way, we see how many there we see problems, and this is why Eastern Europe is full of historical traumas, and I will describe Eastern Europeans as historically traumatized people because of bloody history, historically traumatized people, and I will use even metaphor of military minds. This trap, which you mentioned, on my opinion, can be interpreted as military minds and history as a land of mines. And that militaries have the speciality and specialists how to clear for the clearing of these mines, and they develop even engineers of clearing of mines. However, we don't have clearing of these traps or mines, of historical mines, and our territory of Eastern Europe is full of these historical mines. Endless of these mines, and we need specialists, for the clearing of these historical mines.
Yes, and that leads me to another question, which I believe is very important, because I fully agree that Eastern Europe is this space which is full of full of unreflected collective transgenerational traumas, and this is because of the history we underwent here. But currently, we are somehow confronted with a culturally and commonly dominant view, common and culturally dominant attitude, which can be somehow articulated. Well, let's leave all of this behind. It's time to overcome it and to start thinking about future. But this is obviously a very short-sighted strategy. Since while doing this, we are somehow condemning ourselves to what psychoanalysis calls the return of the repressed. And Gintas, one of your great ideas is that perhaps one of the most important functions of philosophy, or at least one of the most important functions of philosophy, is detraumatization of the sedimented history. How does detraumatizing philosophy work? What are the methods and potential outcomes of such a, let's call it, philosophical historical therapy?
Yeah, let's return to this metaphor of military minds. That's just remember, imagine that somebody in that Donetsk region will say, forget about these mines on our lands. Let's do our agricultural job now because there is no any problems, and we will just take some machines and we will do our, this farmer work. That's everything will be, tragic in this sense immediately because you forget about all these mines. Now it's the same about our history and our trauma. If you will ask the same question of psychoanalytic, he probably will answer. If you forget about your, prohibited traumas, which you cannot even remember, that this shadow side of your shadow side will always influence all your solutions every day. Every day you will be traumatized in different situations because you negate your own shadow side. We consist from two parts, From the one side, we are very rational, as Immanuel Kant, and from the other side, we are very irrational and have our shadow side, as the same Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant wrote a genius book about critique of different forms of reason, and from the other side, he had terrible sexual life, I would say, and terrible sexual history, which he negated all this time and negated women, and he negated childish games because he always cared to be very reasonable and clever. And this was his traumatic side, that he never reconciled with his own shadow. This reconciliation with shadow side, it's not always can be appropriate and accepted by the society. For example, Theodor Adorno and many other writers and Max Horkheimer wrote that Marquis de Sade was much more reconciliated guy because he, from the one side, he was very wise and follower of Jean-Jacques Rousseau regarding constitution, social consent, and from the other side, he completely accepted his own sexual interests, and he was very open about how to reconcile his desires with social, consent, and he proposed even to change constitution after a great French Revolution in Marquis de Sade way. However, he cannot understood why these other people started persecute him. What happened? Because he is wise, clever, and everything looks good. But his proposal about social consent was so terrible that even Jacobins, was terrified by Marquis de Sade. These Bolsheviks, Jacobins, they were terrified by Marquis de Sade. But so it means that reconciliation with our shadow side not always acceptable for the other society. So there is two steps. First is to find and these minds or this shadow side, and the second to find socially appropriated, socially acceptable solution, how to find social justice about these minds, and this how to clear these minds, but in the sense not only to find them and identify, but how to solve this problem. One of the problem how to solve this is proposed by critical and post-critical theory. It's mutual recognition. Mutual recognition, it means that you need to recognize your own guilty, and I need to recognize my own guilty. Look, how it looks like interesting. If, for example, Lithuanians will recognize some guilty they are guilty. About Stepan Batary University in Vilnius, how it was, Lithuanized. And they will say, we recognize our guilty. And Polish side will not recognize Polish guilty. That's Lithuanians will become more free in this. Okay, we recognize it's your problem that you don't. That you will go with your shadow side. It's always traumatic. We liberate ourselves from our shadow side. It's not mutual recognition. But in any way, this example shows that both sides need to do their own job. It's mutual recognition. It means that both sides do meaningful action to find this mutual recognition. Hegel wrote that liberation from slavery and from lord-slave dialectics and persecution and exploitation is possible only when this meaningful mutual recognition happens, when you will do it. The problem is that slave cannot recognize himself meaningfully. First of all, he needs to develop his own consciousness, and according to Hegel, it happened through the Christianity. Christianity helped for slaves to recognize themselves in some dignity way, and after it, they can, but not always, try to do some mutual recognition with the lords. Lords became as well Christians, but different Christians, nobility Christians, but in any way Christians. Mutual recognition is the only precondition for reconciliation. It means that mutual recognition is not the solution of our traumas. Solution of our traumas is reconciliation after mutual recognition. However, this mutual recognition presupposes as well understanding each other. How can we understand each other, especially in historical perspective? And the answer is, and proposal one of the possibilities, to use critical hermeneutics. Critical hermeneutics, for example, Paul Ricoeur, he tried to develop this one concept, Paul Ricoeur. He used as well analysis of psychotraumas, how to solve these psychic traumas, and historical psychic traumas. I will not say that we must to follow all of us Paul Ricoeur. No, not at all. But his example is very nice because he identified historical problem and trauma, tried to show the different perspectives of interpretation of this historical trauma. Then he didn't develop this concept of mutual recognition because he thought that it's enough just, understanding and interpretation. On my opinion, it's not enough to find and to interpret. In my opinion, this finding and interpretation of the trauma means that it's supposed that we will invite for mutual recognition, and then after mutual recognition it will be successful and meaningful. We can try to reconcile on some conscious level, with identifying our shadow sides, and all this process I call as detraumatizing. And you see how many philosophical work you need to detraumatize the history. When historians, I don't like to criticize all historians. Some of historians are very involved into critical hermeneutics, into psychoanalytical approach, philosophical interpretation. But some of them are still follow illusion of historical truth. And they become destructive. So we need to remember that some historical researches can be toxic.
It is very difficult not to agree with your final word in response to this question. And this somehow leads me to another point I want to discuss with you. Because another great idea of yours is what you call the philosophical mediation in culture diplomacy. You wrote 2 excellent papers published in our journal, EIDOS, a journal for philosophy of culture. One was devoted to this detraumatizing function of philosophy, and another one to precisely this topic I want to touch upon now. Why do we need philosophy in cultural diplomacy? What philosophy can or ought to add here? And what are the limits of such a philosophically mediated cultural diplomacy?
Oh, okay, we can call in shorter sense philosophical diplomacy, but when I use this concept philosophical diplomacy, it's not clear for many what does it mean. Ordinary philosophers are imagined as some, boring people, who sit somewhere alone and think about metaphysical problems which never existed. That's some
Iron Tower of philosophy.
Yeah. This is Iron Tower of philosophy. It's not about what I call practical philosophy or pragmatic philosophy. I'm a representative of rather this practical and pragmatic philosophical approach to many of problems, and to find solutions of this. And practical philosophy presupposes that practical philosophy can participate in soft power solutions, Cultural diplomacy is very important element of soft power. Soft power, we can solve many of our international problems and conflicts through the instruments of soft power if we have good diplomacy and if our presidents can understand the role of cultural diplomacy. It's not always happen, always, especially militarists or economists, strong economists, they would like to use so-called or hard power, military power, or so-called smart power, it's economical, financial power. But now we are talking about soft power. Soft power consists, first of all, from understanding, interpretation and understanding. If you will check who are cultural diplomats in our embassies, majority of them are or just fun people, try to spend a good time, to find a good time. Some of them are educated in art critique. Art critique is quite good, but it's very limited area of cultural diplomacy. Of course, this to help and to provide theater exchange or galleries, exhibition exchange, it's very nice. To support international museum collaboration, it's very nice job. But it's not about contemporary political solutions. It's just about museums or exhibitions. When we are talking about more, I would say, larger field of problems, there you need to have some kind of other skills and other possibilities. And I try to understand and look at many of cultural diplomats, what kind of education do they have, who were the best. And I found that many of them were very involved in philosophical discussions, how to interpret, for example, different religion groups, how to interpret different genres of art genres, you need to understand many of differences and to interpret these differences and not to provide one side of our ideology or to provide dialogue between these different fields. This presupposes philosophical skills, for sure. And philosophers, in this sense, mediate between, for example, those who like one genre of music or theater with those who don't understand this genre, or between different genres. And this is philosophical mediation, which is that element of hermeneutics. Hermeneutics mediate these problems and help people to understand what's going here and how it's happened. I was invited many times in Lithuania and as well abroad to participate in some conflict resolution. What philosophers do in conflict resolution? First of all, differently from, for example, militaries or from police, we don't try to find who is right. This is forbidden. That's not, because rightness, it means that one of the sides should be, persecuted and blamed, or stopped. That's it's for example, one time I tried to solve Lithuania very big drama conflict between fascist skinheads and local punks, anarchists, and. A local police officer asked me, "Who is right?" Say me, we will arrest the other side. That was, I found that it's, for me, it was more difficult to explain for local authorities than for the skinheads or punks, which how to resolve the problem. The problem was to resolve not about who is right, but how to separate spheres of influence in the city, which street is which, It was not. So you see, this is a different job, but in this sense, philosophers need to be acknowledged, to involved into subcultural movement, because they need to understand these cultural groups, their worldviews, their ideologies, their visions, to speak with them, not to negate them, and this presupposes some diplomatic feelings, diplomatic sense, This is important. I'm not sure that philosophical faculties always try to develop these skills.
Okay, so returning to the issues you discussed earlier, it looks that there is some serious work for us philosophers when it comes to these processes of reconciliation between our nations. I mean, between Poles and Ukrainians, Poles and Belarusians, and so on and so forth. Yes.
Yes, I agree.
We should not leave it. Certainly, we should not leave it to the politicians, but also historians is not enough.
I would say, look, that for example, let's imagine that you are phenomenologist, meet with ultra-Marxist philosopher, This is how these philosophers communicate. One of the possibility, you will hate each other and no communication. And the other, you understand that there is two different possibilities of how to approach to the world. One of them is Marxist interpretation pure, and the other phenomenon Husserlian, interpretation. They are different, and they sometimes they haven't even common points. That's so different. But you can recognize in philosophical faculty these differences and to accept these differences. And even sometimes you can listen each other, how they interpret the problem, and you recognize mutual recognition of possibility and interpretation, and you develop your own skills how to interpret the other guy and to find for him some place in your world understanding. You can accept as a phenomenologist Marxist in some one way, and it's possible. Why this normal communication with all the differences cannot happen between Lithuanians and Poles? For sure. I would say that between Lithuanian Catholic and Lithuanian pagan are more differences than between two Catholics, from Lithuania and Pole side. If you will check how Lithuanian pagans, new pagans, Romuva, hate some Catholics, and how do they interpret history? It's much more difficult, everything, than when we are talking about, Lithuanian Poles in Vilnius and Lithuanian in Vilnius. And this is, I would say, this is a drama, not how Lithuanian Poles, occupied Vilnius, but how Lithuanian Poles, did, destroy democratic Polish Republic after Józef Pilsudski take power in Warsaw.
Good point, I would say. But I also pose a question about some limitations. Is there any moment in such a philosophically mediated cultural diplomacy when you, as a practitioner of that activity, recognize, okay, my job is done, I cannot do anything more here?
Yeah, I would say there is limits. I need to remember we started from separation of historical truth and historical justice. And justice is the moral category, and historical truth is some empirical induction, and you never achieve full truth about this one. But that justice is based on social consent, And social consent doesn't mean that you need to search for the final truth, and that the role of philosophers is not to provide the truth, but to provide justice, and to stop those who would like to find final truth. It's very interesting that ordinarily we imagine that the role of philosophers is to fight for truth. No, to stop people to fight for truth.
That's a serious point. Okay, Gintas, let me turn to another topic which will somehow provide us with a kind of a connecting link with the beginning of our conversation. For centuries, up until now, Eastern Europe was commonly perceived and experienced as a sphere of influence of Russia. I believe it is yet another narrative trap which not only has affected directly Eastern Europe in many painful ways, but has had great and grave consequences for the Western perception of Eastern Europe. As you well know, I promote the view that Russia is not and never was a part of Europe, simply because it has never truly conformed to the European cultural patterns. Following Berdyaev, by the way, a Russian thinker, I would say even more. It is neither Europe, nor Asia, nor even a coherent synthesis of both. Do you agree with such a diagnosis? And if so, on what grounds? Also, if you were to liberate Eastern Europe from this label of being under the influence of Russian influence or cultural dominance, in a very broad understanding of the adjective cultural, what kind of consequences it can have for our self-understanding? Perhaps we should admit that the category in question loses any validity whatsoever.
Yeah, first of all, we're speaking about big data, not about individuals. Individual, one or the other Russian person can be very European, as Indian or Pakistani, or Japanese. Everybody can be very European or American and vice versa. Poles or Lithuanians, very Japanese people, through their long story, and involvement. Maybe it's too difficult, but in any way, this is a theoretical, possibility. Then we are speaking about some big data, and ideologies. Big data and ideologies. How these big data and ideologies coincide. Or sociologically, big data means that many or majority of population recognize this ideology as appropriate or as their appropriate character. That's if we will look at contemporary Putinist Russia, they declare that they are not Europe. This is okay, very, very nice. Why do we need not to recognize his claim that they are not Europe? Because majority of Russians, big data, they agree that they are not Europe, they are Russia, and Russia is something different. They use even word not Russia sometimes, or Rossianin, which includes Bashkirs, Tatars, Dagestans, Chechens, and the other nations, and all of them compose Rossianin, and Russia. It's the different than just group of Russians, and they declare that they are not no Asia, no Europe. It's something special and particular, and they have their own ideologies, like Alexander Dugin or the others, and or Prokhanov. But the problem is that some, dissidents from Russia, who now dissidents who are in Western countries, they would like to propose they are completely different. No, they declare that not we are Europeans. So we can say, okay, those who are in Europe, Russians, probably some of you are Europeans for sure, and some of you, they would like just to play the role of Europeans, but you are not proper Europeans. You don't know exactly who you are. And in any way, it doesn't negate that this Putinist claim that they are not Europeans. Okay, they are not Europeans. But how it's happened, what is important? This is important to remember two historical periods of Europeization of Russia. One of them started somewhere about Peter I, and Ekaterina Great. They consciously tried to transform Asiatic or Mongol Tatar Russia into European way. It was not always successful, but we see long centuries praxis to transform. Symbolically, it coincides with St. Petersburg as a capital of Russia. When Moscow was capital and is capital of Russia, this is always we see Asiatic type of empire, or building of Asiatic type of empire, and now we see the same Asiatic type of empire, what is going now in Russia state building. Then the other what we need to remember that Ekaterina Great, and not only she, invited many of, for example, German people to settle territories, big territories near Volga. It was approximately at the end of Soviet Union, there were approximately about 3 million of Germans. And we cannot say that these Germans were not Europeans, but Asiatic, As well, there was Baltic countries, Ukraine, Belarus, and Georgia. All of them did this Soviet Union, at least partly in some one way, European country. And this is memory of this imperial Russian period of Europeization, as well created some vision and illusion even in Russia that this is European country. This is European country. But after Soviet Union failure, after liberation of many of countries, all Germans, 3 million, they left Russia and they settled in Germany, back to Germany. This is great escape. I would say a completely tragic escape for Russia. You can imagine that Putin, and not only Putin, and before him Yeltsin and Putin, they declare that they built some European country, but all Germans who came to transform Asiatic Russia into Europe, they left Russia. This is great Germans escape from Russia. It's very, very significant point on the history. Not only that Lithuania or Latvia liberated. It means who stay in Russia after collapse of Soviet Union and Germans escape. Stay, first of all, majority of some Rossianin, I would say. This is very special group. And some people, very educated, who consider themselves as Europeans, still Europeans. But when Russian aggression started against Ukraine in 2014, from the beginning, more and more pro-European educated Russian left as well. It's approximately 2 million of European Russians left.
Only in 2014.
From this period. So you can imagine when we are speaking about big data, how many millions I mentioned Europeans left this territory which pretended to be European. Now it's not European territory by the ideological point of view, by consciousness of local people point of view, with only few, not very big exclusions who try to consider themselves as European intelligentsia, European intelligence. There are some of them in universities, still you can find somewhere in corridors of philosophical faculties, but in any way, that's this hope, European or Western world hope that Russia is a European country is big mistake.
Well, returning to Berdyaev, because I see here a kind of additional trap narrative trap concerning Russia itself. I really like the introduction to the Russian idea by Nikolai Berdyaev, to which I referred in my question. But then the end of the conclusion of that very work is that, okay, we are neither European nor Asian, nor a coherent synthesis of both, but there is something special in us, some kind of solidarity spirit permeating the whole Russian people. And now my question is that, is it not a precisely narrative trap to think about itself in terms of some kind of a uniqueness, in some kind of as a cultural formation, exceptional cultural formation?
I would say Nikolai Berdyaev, he built this trap. He didn't find, but built this trap together with other Eurasianians. Eurasia, its movement of after October Revolution, even before October Revolution, they started to think that Russia is not European or Asian, but Eurasia. And they developed this ideology, and Russian idea and Russia and Eurasia, it's interconnected to little bit different movements. And but remember, Nikolai Berdyaev, he thought and wrote about new medieval ages, which mean that we need to reconstruct some Orthodox church-based state, which can imitate Byzantium, and Moscow is the third, Rome, and or even Russia is New Byzantium, and this is all these concepts, and it is a trap. They start to seduct themselves, to temptate themselves by that they are exclusive, some exclusion from the whole world. But it's interesting that we can say and we can call exactly philosophers who constructed this the trap. And it's we discussed about philosophers who can clear these historical minds. And now we're talking about philosophers who bring these historical minds as some ideological traps, and how historians or literal critics, or theater critics, how can they clean these traps and minds if these minds were built by great engineers of minds, philosophers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what about the consequences? We agreed on the fact that Russia is not to be considered as a part of Europe, broadly speaking, concerning the big data, as you call it. But what kind of consequences it has? Very short. I'm asking for a very short, very brief answer now, because of our time constraint. How should we self-understand ourselves?
The answer for short period and very long period. For the very long period, I don't know.
That's a very smart answer.
And for the short period, to recognize Russian Kremlin declaration that they are not European, and to work with them that they are not Europeans, because to clean this consciousness, we have no any possibility, and I'm afraid that we can see in future big civil war in Russia between different groups of people who, and no one of this group of people will be Europeans. This will be very strange for us, civil war between them for power. It's like Asia countries' civil wars, very bloody and without any good idea what to do. And after this big conflict, we will see how we can speak about long-term period. But when we are asking, for example, if you will ask how can we work with Russian dissidents, okay, it depends who they are from the situation. Some of them are very educated, European people. Some of them American, Some of them are involved in Berdayev crazy philosophy. Some of them criticize Chad followers of Western way of Russian philosopher, starting from Pyotr Chadaev, and then can do. It depends who is our colleague.
What about our self-perception? Because Russia for so long was considered, Eastern Europe was for such a long time considered to be a Russian colony, so to speak. And now, especially among Belarusians and Ukrainians, but also among Balts and Poles, if you use the umbrella Eastern Europe, the immediate response is we are not Eastern Europeans, we are just Europeans. I'm trying to I try to promote the view that yes, there is some positive value in such a designation, but we have to be clear how we understand this positive value.
Deleuze and Guattari interpreted schizo logic from positive point of view, not as a negative or positive. Schizo means divided, but it's not some madness to have a divided mind, but we can reconcile our different points of view. From the one side, we consider themselves as a general European Union citizens, and we are right if we recognize it. And from the other side, we try to provide our own Eastern European politics. And there I support this idea, because, for example, Lithuania and Poland have special attitude to Belarus, Its attitude is a little bit different, but in any way they have a special attitude. And to develop different policy regarding Ukraine, and how to support Ukraine. And we feel threats from Russia more than other countries, And every year and every week prepare for possible, military clash with Russia. So we have very special policy, even different from the other European countries, different from Brussels. And from the other side, we have the same like Brussels. So this is divided mind. It's not not something which show our that manipulative character. No, it's not about manipulation. It's about normal situation. According this schizo logic. she's a logic. And now we're involved. And I would say, for example, me personally, I don't care about Russians' future and destiny. This is too big problem, unsolvable. But I'm care about Belarusian situation and how to help for Belarusian prisoners and how to support their position, and how to work with Ukrainians, because they have not only the war with Russia, but as well very deep psychic problems inside of Ukraine, because this bloody war in any way traumatized millions of people. And this, how to work with this traumatized by consciousness. This is the other problem. There's so many problems. Why do we need care about what's going on with Russian consciousness? They accept them in general, according big data. That they are Russians, pro-Putinists. They hate everybody, and they hate themselves. Inside.
Agreed.
And they are going to big conflict in their side. We cannot help them with their shadow. And this shadow of their consciousness will destroy all Russia.
I fully agree. Thank you, Gintas, for this very rich and inspiring talk. It would be really great to prolong it, but because of our time constraints, we have to stop here. So thank you again.
Thank you.
We send warm regards to and I think it's a good moment and a good point here to send some warm regards to our friends from Ukraine and Belarus. And this concludes another episode of our podcast. Thank you very much.